What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and an 85.8% screen-to-body ratio. With the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we're getting a 6.49-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 83.7% screen-to-body ratio. So both of these phones do have pretty good displays, but the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a couple advantages. First of all, as you can clearly see, the Moto G Stylus 5G is much larger, and this tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. And in addition to this, with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9 versus 20:9, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor, and this is going to give you a more immersive experience when you're doing something in landscape mode, like for example watching a video, and when you're doing something that involves scrolling, like reading an article or scrolling through social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. In addition to this, with a 120Hz refresh rate versus 90Hz, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother with the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now, you're probably not actually going to notice this in the video, but when you're actually using the phones, if you're doing something with motion on the screen, like watching a video or playing a game for example, you are going to get a slightly better, more premium feeling experience with the Moto G Stylus 5G. But again, keep in mind, this difference in particular is really subtle. So really, for the displays, the main advantages the Moto G Stylus has are the size and dimensions. But that being said, the N200 5G is really not bad either. And really, if you prefer a more compact phone and you don't want one that's too large, having a smaller display might actually be a good thing for you. So in that case, it really depends on personal preference. But in general, both phones do have really good displays with great resolutions, and despite a few differences, you're not going to go wrong with either of them. Now for storage, the Moto G Stylus 5G is getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is getting 64GB with microSD card expansion as well. So clearly here, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a huge advantage with quadruple the storage, and this is going to be especially good if you're a power user. If you have a lot of apps and photos and videos and stuff like that, again, that's definitely going to make a huge difference. And even for the average user, while 64GB really isn't terrible, it's definitely not ideal in this day and age with stuff like apps and even the system taking up more and more space. So in general, even though 64GB is acceptable if you're more of a light user, for most people 256GB is definitely going to make a difference. But again, remember, both phones also do have microSD card expansion, so if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos for example onto a microSD card to save some space, you can do that with both of these phones. For security features, both phones do have fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys, definitely a good spot for a fingerprint scanner, and both phones also do have face unlock as well. But starting with the Moto G Stylus 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And moving on to the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners worked real well, no issues whatsoever. And again, remember, both phones also have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, both phones have hole punch designs for the front facing cameras, and both cameras are 16 megapixels. Then in the back, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we got a triple camera setup here as well, with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, both phones are pretty good, but the main difference here is the Moto G Stylus 5G does have an ultra wide camera, whereas the OnePlus Nord N200 5G only has a macro camera. So if you do want the ultra wide camera, definitely keep this in mind. As far as quality goes, I feel like these phones are pretty similar, but in general, the Moto G Stylus 5G does take better photos. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want the highest quality between the two, the Moto G Stylus 5G will have an advantage. But that being said, the camera quality with the OnePlus Nord Nord N200 5G really isn't bad. So if you're more of a light user when it comes to the camera, maybe you just want a couple nice Instagram photos every now and then, in that case, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G will still get the job done. For video, it's the same kind of thing. Both phones can record pretty decent videos, but the Moto G Stylus 5G will have better quality. And as far as the resolution goes, both phones do max out at 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, but the Moto G Stylus 5G can record at 60 frames per second, whereas the OnePlus Nord N200 5G maxes out at 30. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the Moto G Stylus 5G we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the OnePlus Nord N200 5G we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. Now I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G we're getting a single core score of 622 and a multi-core score of 1928. With the OnePlus Nord N200 5G we're getting a single core score of 510 and a multi-core score of 1600. So as you can see from this test, as far as performance goes, the Moto G Stylus 5G will have a bit of an advantage, but I will say from my experience using these phones, they are actually a little bit closer than you might think. While the Moto G Stylus 5G is in fact a little bit faster, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is not slow by any means, and there's not really a whole lot the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to be able to do that the OnePlus Nord N200 5G can't do. So in general, while there is going to be a little bit of a difference, and if you want the faster phone of the two, the Moto G Stylus 5G will still have a bit of an advantage. Again, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is just fine for most activities, and really both phones do have great performance for what they are. Now for the batteries, both phones do have 5000 mAh batteries, so each of them are going to get great battery life and longevity. And as far as fast charging goes, with the Moto G Stylus 5G we're getting 15W fast charging, and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G supports 18W fast charging. So it's going to be a little bit better with the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, but really not by much, and honestly for a OnePlus phone, this fast charging is actually really not that good. Compared to pretty much any other mid-range phone out there, it's definitely not bad, but again, I've seen so many OnePlus phones with stuff like 30W fast charging, so in comparison to that, it's definitely not nearly as good, but honestly, both of these phones in my experience do charge up pretty quickly, so either way, as far as the battery goes, I don't really have any real complaints. In addition to this, as far as other features go, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, keep in mind you will be able to do that with either of these phones. In addition to this, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, obviously as the name suggests, this phone does have a stylus, whereas the OnePlus Nord N200 5G doesn't. Now it's not the best stylus in the world, and compared to something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra for example, it's definitely not going to be anywhere near that level, and you won't be able to do any real art on it, but if you just want to take handwritten notes or something like that, or maybe play a game, or just use it to navigate through your home screen, it still will get the job done. And at the end of the day, the Moto G Stylus 5G is really one of the 2 or 3 non-flagship phones that have a stylus. So if you do want a phone with a stylus and you don't want to spend the money on something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, you don't really have a whole lot of other options. But compared to something like the TCL Stylus 5G for example, I would say the stylus on this phone is quite a bit better than that, and compared to the older Moto G Stylus phones, it is better than those as well. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, despite these phones actually being really similar in features and performance, I would say the Moto G Stylus 5G is the better device here. Their displays are really similar in almost every way, but the Moto G Stylus 5G is larger, has a taller and more narrow form factor, and has a slightly higher refresh rate, and all those advantages, some being more subtle than others, are going to give you a much better experience when you're consuming content. The Moto G Stylus 5G also has quadruple the storage of the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, and I feel like this is one of the biggest advantages this phone has, because in this day and age, with stuff like apps and even the system itself taking up more and more space, having more storage is definitely really important. And even if you don't think you're going to use it all, 64GB, while not being terrible, in my opinion, really just isn't going to be enough for most people. The Moto G Stylus 5G also has a better camera setup that is going to take better quality photos, it has a more powerful processor, and again, it does have a stylus, making it one of only a handful of phones in this price range that do. But on the other hand, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G really is not a bad phone either, and when it comes to stuff like the display, the processing power, the camera, and just features in general, it's really not far behind either. So in general, if you want the phone between the two that has the best performance, best display, best camera, and just all around better features, the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to be the one to go with. But again, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is really not a bad phone, and if you can get it for a good deal, I don't think you'll regret it either. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next one.